Alex Cole-Hamilton, leader of the Scottish Lib Dems. Thank you very much for talking to us first and foremost.
Lovely to be here.
For those who don't know where we are and can't read that sign behind us, we're in Ardrossan.
Indeed.
A few days out from the end of the Holyrood campaign. Let's start with rumours that I hear that you're quite confident that you're going to win 10 seats as a minimum potentially at this election. Why so confident?
So we've been relentlessly targeting our ground game in 10 constituencies right across Scotland, where we, I think, have successfully proven ourselves to beat the SNP. That's right across the Highlands and Islands. It's in Strathkelvin and Bearsden, it's in Edinburgh Northern, the new seat there, and obviously the seats that we hold. But also we're really excited about the regional list, because for the first time in a long time, wherever you are, a vote for the Lib Dems on that second peach-coloured regional ballot has a really good chance of electing a Lib Dem MSP who will fight for you and your community.
What does that actually mean, fight for you and your community? Because there's the long history of the Lib Dems in Scotland is very, very strong local campaigners. What are people getting from you guys as a regional list MSP in a way that you won't get as your constituency MSP in Edinburgh, for example?
But you will get that from a regional MSP. We just put in the shoe leather, we put in the hours. I always lean into the unlikely words of Kemi Badenoch when she said, you think of a Liberal Democrat, it's somebody who turns up and fixes your church roof, guilty as charged. So we love our communities and we love our regions, and we will go the extra mile. We knock more doors than any other political party. We know what makes people tick, and that's why we're putting that at the heart of this election campaign. We're back. Also, people know we can win because we proved, despite the odds, we trebled our seats at the last general election in Scotland, overtook the Scottish Tories, came within touching distance of the SNP, and we hope to replicate that in a couple of weeks' time.
So we're here in Ardrossan. A ferry was here. It did actually leave. It wasn't broken.
Leicester-spotted Arran ferry, indeed.
I think it was the Caledonian Isles, wasn't it? This one.
It's not their usual service.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
Ferries are a big deal for you guys. A lot of your target seats have ferries in them. You've been a very strong critic of the SNP's handling of ferries. What do you think is the main reason for the mess that we see on the west coast of Scotland?
So, this is just the incompetence and the neglect of 19 years of SNP administration in relief, in microcosm. This is a ferry fleet. People will remember the launch of the Glen Sannox in 2017 by Nicola Sturgeon on the eve of a general election. She wanted the positive PR, but it had painted on windows and funnels, and it spent the best part of the next 6-7 years in dry dock, still being brought up to scratch. It's done barely any passenger hours at sea, and over the crucial Easter getaway, we saw most islands in Scotland affected by ferry disruption, robbing them of tourist income, stopping people from getting to the mainland to attend hospital appointments. This is a crisis, and yet the SNP are asleep at the wheel. We want to do something.
Do you think the SNP care?
I'm not sure they do care. They talk a good game in the Parliament, but why are things not getting better? This has been a crisis in the making for the best part of 10 years. And it's they're not giving places like Ardrossan access to compensation. The ferry disruption,
this place, aren't they?
The ferry disruption compensation scheme didn't touch coastal communities. It only looked at island communities, and whilst that was welcome, we've asked them to go further. I asked for the recall of Parliament in the early days of this campaign on that basis, and we need them to go further. But it's not just about money in pockets now to make businesses whole who suffered. It's about making sure that this never happens again. That's why in the new Parliament we bring forward a ferries bill which would instruct a 30-year rolling procurement programme. It shouldn't come as a surprise that the fleet is going to age out at some point. So let's be ready for that. And let's have community voices at the heart of how we procure them in the future.
So there was a story last week about the replacement for the Lord of the Isles, MV Lord of the Isles, and the idea that Ferguson Marine, which is not down the road, it's a decent whack away from here, was being blocked from bidding for that ferry on the basis that it hasn't built a ferry like it in the last 5 years. Now, there's been a degree of uproar. I'm intrigued as to what your view is on that. Should Ferguson Marine be able to bid for that ferry given its track record?
So, I understand what excluded Ferguson Marine from being able to tender for that was that it hadn't completed 2 vessels over 75 metres in the last 5 years. And the really frustrating, heartbreaking thing for that shipyard and its workers is that if if we fast forward to October, or when the Glen Rosa is actually due to commence sailing, it would have. And again, I don't think this is the fault of the workers. This is the fault of SNP procurement mismanagement, which has messed that shipyard around.
I want to dig into that though, because that shipyard has demonstrated for the last 10 years an inability to build a ferry of the nature of which is up for re-procurement. Why give it to them?
So this is what's confused engineers across Scotland, is that the SNP went to tender without a design specification. So everyone was sort of fishing in the dark. So I really don't think we should blame the shipyard or the workers for a moving target.
Which is you'd be happy with it going to Ferguson's if the rules were changed.
I just think they should get to the races in terms of the procurement window. They're not being allowed to bid at all. They're not at the races. So I think that CMAL, and whoever actually makes the final decision about the Lord of the Isles will make the right decision for Scotland. I'm sure of that. But it's only fair that Ferguson Marine get the opportunity to tender. And I just think that, we're talking about a matter of months. That window that they're not going to have completed those two requisite vessels.
Do you know, there's a lot of people who'll look at Ferguson Marine and there'll be people at home watching this going, I've heard about X million pounds being sent to that shipyard.
I know.
And it was £500 million pounds for the two ferries. Is it not just a money pit? Admittedly, there are jobs there that people have.
Yeah.
Is there not a point at which the Scottish government should cut and run?
It's more than just one yard and one company. In a lot of ways, the reputation of a once proud shipbuilding industry on the Clyde, on the west coast of Scotland, has been laid low by this. And we want the opportunity for this yard and the industry generally in this part of Scotland to set things right. And I just don't think we're ever going to get there with the situation as it is. I go back to the fact that this was engineers around the country were astonished when the SNP went to procurement without a design specification. Who does that? And then change the goalposts throughout the development of that project. So I don't think it's fair to solely lay the blame at the shipyard of the workers. I think they need a fighting chance, and we need to re-establish the reputation for shipbuilding in this part of Scotland.
What about, so let's talk a bit about your manifesto. What are the criticisms from, I think it was the Fraser Allender I was reading, that was that at the very least the public document didn't have much in the way of costings. Why not? I get really frustrated by this. We literally sent the Fraser Allender Institute a 26-page costings document that they chose not to read. Now, why they chose not to read it, you'll have to ask them. But it was in the same email. They read our manifesto, but they didn't read the costings document. So I'm quite happy to Why wasn't it in the manifesto?
Well,
why wasn't it in a little annex?
Well, it is on the webpage right now, on the manifesto.
But it clearly wasn't.
Yeah, but we weren't hiding from it, and we published it on the website. So, it's a stylistic decision.
Frustrated by that.
Of course, I think it was just, our policy guys didn't want pages and pages of numbers at the back of the thing. But so we published it as a separate document. We supplied it to Fraser Allender. For whatever reason, they chose not to read it.
Yeah.
We won't make that mistake again. We will append it. And it's so frustrating because I know I and our policy team and our policy committee worked really hard to make sure the sums add up, and they do. And actually, the Institute for Fiscal Studies were very clear when they said that they recognised that we didn't overpromise in this, that and by extension, I think that means that they recognise we're being straight with the electorate, that in tight in purse strings, we're not going to promise you the moon. And lots of sweeties that other parties do, because we take our role in Parliament and potentially in government exceptionally seriously.
So we'll come back to some of the specifics, but given you said potentially in government, what's the dimensions on the curtains in the Deputy Prime Minister's office?
I honestly, I don't know.
I don't believe you.
No, I don't know. And it really, I could live the rest of my life without ever holding ministerial office and be quite happy serving my constituents and my party as leader. Not that I need to do that for the rest of my life. But listen, I got into power to get things done. Lib Dems are in power or in Parliament to get things done. You elect a Lib Dem MSP, you'll get somebody who will fight for you. And it's it's a joy to have this job and it's a privilege, but it's harder to get things done from the opposition benches. There's no question about that. So while I don't seek power for power's sake, I don't fear it. And actually I recognise that with the levers of power, you get to do big and liberal things. And that's, we evidence that in the two budgets that we've recently backed.
I'll come back to those budgets, but let's just briefly talk hypotheticals. You're going to have to deal with me on that. I know politicians don't like talking hypotheticals, but we have probably one of two outcomes on May 7th, which is either a pro-independence majority or a pro-union majority. I think you can probably agree with that. If there is a pro-union majority, have you had any conversations with Anas Sarwar about going into formal coalition?
No kind of pacts or alliances or anything like that.
I asked about coalitions.
No. And look, we believe that Scotland needs change, and it needs to be changed with fairness at its heart.
Do you think you can affect that more as a partner in a minority coalition, or potentially helping SNP budgets through?
I'm not thinking about any of that right now. I'm just trying to get our 10 seats across the line.
Why not? Because that is how the change that you talk so passionately about is going to happen. So you must be looking at the next Parliament and going, how do we do the best of
I always go back to, the phrase I use quite a lot is you don't need to be in power to wield power. Look at Edinburgh City Council. Minority Labour administration that really has to run every decision by the Lib Dem group, and sometimes passes Lib Dem budgets. That's, they are the most powerful.
Accidentally, to be fair.
Well, no, sometimes deliberately. But they are the most powerful Lib Dems in the country as a result. So, and if it works to deliver a kind of change that I think Scotland's ready for, that Scotland's crying out for, which is not Nigel Farage's mean-spirited worldview which punches down on vulnerable groups, but instead is change with fairness at its heart, which fixes our health service, which drives us down the cost of living whilst lifting up Scottish education, getting Scotland moving again, fixing our roads, fixing our ferries, then I'm on board with that.
So you wouldn't do a deal with John Swinney?
No, absolutely not.
Not even if he agreed to half of your manifesto?
No, because the SNP have had their time. They deserve a period of quiet reflection on the opposition benches of this country, and I'm determined to give them that. So we need change, and I've been very clear, I would resign as leader before voting to put John Swinney back in Bute House.
Let's talk a bit about the possibility of you working with Labour in the next election and the next Parliament.
I thought we'd just done that.
Well, we can do it again. Because one of the issues with a pro-union majority, given the support of reform, you've already spoken about how much you dislike Nigel Farage and his politics, is that government will necessarily be propped up by reform votes, either via to put Anas Sarwar in as First Minister, or at budget time. How do you square that?
Well, I mean, this is a level of process that I think a lot of people turn off from. But seeing as you've asked the question, I really don't think that I wouldn't lift the phone to Lord Offord. I hope Anas wouldn't either, and I believe he wouldn't. Ultimately, the vote for First Minister is a majority of votes cast, and I think if.
But you might be backing budgets, Labour budgets, next Parliament.
I can't control how reform MSPs vote.
But you might be backing Labour budgets that include reform policies in them, and you won't.
Well, I wouldn't back a budget. I certainly wouldn't back a budget that include reform policies that we fundamentally disagree with. If there's anything which punches down on vulnerable groups, which rows back on hardware. Well, I mean, again, we're getting into a level of hypothetical here. I'm really struggling to get my head around. But look, we're not going to sell our clothes here, and we've shown, Lib Dem budget cooperation has to work for liberal policies. We're not going to, be sold a pup on a budget which gives us some liberal wins, but also has this dark underbelly of quite misanthropic, small-minded approach to politics. We're just not going to do that.
Some people who are frustrated with the SNP's record will look at particularly the last two budgets which your party backed. I mean, John Swinney makes such a almost pantomime deal of it in Parliament. Do you share a bit of the blame for the last 2 years of SNP government, given that you back their spending plans?
Not at all, because I've said many times, backing an SNP budget is not a referendum on 19 years of SNP administration, which by any metric has failed the people of Scotland. It's a means of unpicking some of the damage. And I think actually, I meet so many people on the doorsteps who respect that we're willing to roll up our sleeves and lay aside our differences. Once a government's established, and it's very difficult in the Scottish context to bring down a government, much as we would have liked to in those 2 years, I think people expect in a parliament of minorities, parties to roll up their sleeves, lay aside their differences, and work for the best interests of the people of Scotland. That's why we delivered £178 million in business rate relief, which would never have happened. £70 million.
But you said there that you would have quite liked to have seen that government collapse.
Yeah.
There was the possibility of that had you not backed their budget.
No, it's much, much harder, because if you don't back the budget, it goes on to a continuing resolution of the last year's spending without an uplift, which then suddenly means that bills are not being paid in the public sector, people are losing their jobs, there'll be a lot of pain, a lot of chaos, and I think people would rightly turn on us and say, just do your job. So, I mean, it's for the birds. We looked at that and we seriously considered doing it, but actually, I think, delivering the 70 million for colleges, more money for getting people access to neurodiversity, or unit support services for some of Scotland's 1,500 babies who've been born addicted to drugs since 2017. None of that would have happened without Lib Dem involvement.
Let's just talk about your manifesto. We'll go back to that. One of the things in there that I think people watching will be interested in is you want to lift tax thresholds in line with inflation. You want to close that tax gap in the higher rate between those earning 43,000 in Scotland and those earning 50,000 in England, and that the marginal tax rates involved in that. How much is that going to cost?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
So how much is going to close that gap, that marginal tax gap?
The marginal sorry, I missed the first part of your question.
So you're going to increase in
the whole of the UK?
No, in Scotland.
Oh, in Scotland. Sorry.
Scotland. How much is that going to cost?
I got slightly confused. I thought you were talking about Ned Davey policy there. No. So aspirationally, we want to close the gap when the financial position allows. That's not going to be in the next 3 years of this parliament, but it might be in the life of this 3-year parliament.
What does that? I mean, people will hear that and get really frustrated, because you're not the only party leader who said we hope to do this on tax. John Swinney famously said, believes that he hasn't broken the tax promise not to raise income tax rates, which is obviously nonsense.
It is nonsense.
But people watching at home will go, well, why bother backing you if it's an aspiration?
Well,
tell us when it'll happen.
Because unlike Reform, Reform just want to take a hatchet to public spending, and that will cause real pain. Even their talk about abolishing quangos. The quangos they want to abolish are the ones that are keeping our hospitals clean and making sure they're being inspected.
You want to abolish some quangos?
Well, yeah, but not to the extent that they do. I mean, we understand that where the efficiencies lie, and I'll come on to that in a second. But we believe in being straight with people about what's in the public purse, and that doesn't allow for tax cuts right now. We recognise that Scotland's high tax environment is stopping people locating here, particularly wealth creators, consultant surgeons. If you're a consultant surgeon, you get a job offer for a hospital in Manchester or in Glasgow, you're far more likely to take the Manchester job because of the tax regime there. And so we recognise it changes behaviours, and we'll be evidence-led on that. But we're not going to lie to people and say we can do this tomorrow. We want to do it over the life of this parliament, but fundamentally we recognise that the social contract has been damaged by the SNP. They don't trust the SNP government with their tax money. Look at the ferries. I mean, that's a great example. Hundreds and hundreds of millions of taxpayers' money, pounds worth of taxpayers' money being funneled into this white elephant that people have seen. And again, laid a once proud shipping industry low. So we need to heal that. The other thing about how we pay for all of that is, for example, the social care bottleneck. And what do I mean by that? Well, on any given night in Scotland, there are 2,000 Scots well enough to go home from hospital, but too frail to do so without a care package to receive them home or a care bed in the community. And they are stuck in hospital because no such package is available. That's costing the NHS £1.2 million a day. And it's leading to cancelled surgical operations. It's the reason why people can't leave at A&E, not because of a deficiency in emergency care. They're on a bed in a corridor for 25 hours because there's no bed to receive them in the main hospital. That is no longer a place of treatment, it's a place of waiting. And that's why ambulances are stacking up outside A&E, unable to discharge their patients. So that's why we have at the centrepiece of our manifesto, put that £400 million commitment to addressing that social care bottleneck by making care a profession of choice, recruiting the workers we need, and giving them, where necessary, reserved key worker housing, particularly in the north of Scotland, where it's hard for them to get in the housing market.
Let's change topic completely. The debate over trans rights and women's rights in the last Parliament was bitter, ferocious and fierce.
It was.
You, I think, have been relatively defensive of your party's position. Do you regret anything about the way that you handled it or the Parliament handled it, and how your party voted at that point?
So I don't regret how our party voted. I mean, we believe that a humane approach to gender recognition remains an unanswered question, but I do regret how it was handled at the time. I don't think enough work was done by the government to bring communities with us, stakeholders with us, hearts and minds with us, or even to get the proper legal advice as to whether it was competent for the Parliament to do it. And as such, it's created a lot of anger and heat and division in our communities. It's painted a back on the very vulnerable group that we were trying to help in the trans community.
There were lots of people, though, saying that at the time and telling MSPs like yourself that all of these factors you're bringing up now, why weren't you listening?
Well, we were told explicitly by SNP ministers that it was legally competent. It was in our manifesto. In fact, it was in everybody's manifesto in 2016. The Conservatives have subsequently changed their mind on this. And members of every party voted for it. There was a free vote in the Tory party. You know, their respected former leader Jackson Carlow did, their justice spokesperson, their health spokesperson.
You're not taking much responsibility for not listening to those who vocalised the concerns that then became true.
I will always listen to alternate points of view. I'm a Liberal, I'm a Democrat, and I recognise that. And let me be clear to those people who disagree with me on this. Liberal Democrats are not looking to relitigate this in this Parliament. We recognise the damage this has done to community relations, to the trans community, that actually I think they want this to go away for a bit because it's just so toxic. And ultimately, I just think we need to lay it aside, let it find its level. And if we do come back to, when we do come back to it, do it on a four nations approach, which brings those communities with us. But let me be clear, gender recognition reform was not about giving somebody a passport to a place they weren't allowed yesterday. It was just about allowing trans people the dignity to have the state recognise who they have lived their lives as in the documents they are required to hold, a birth certificate, a death certificate. None of these places get you access to places. But I understand why people, the concerns that people felt about this and the questions that went unanswered in large part by the government. The final thing I'll say is this. The threat to, and this speaks to where we are now in terms of single-sex spaces in the Supreme Court judgment, which the Lib Dems accept. But the threat to women in our society in public spaces is not trans people. It remains and always will be predatory men. And I would much rather we spend our time focused on how we drive down men's violence and abuse of women and girls.
Just on you personally, Alex, you voted from a bar during last Parliament. You've also had to apologise for swearing at a government minister or an MSP.
That was in the previous Parliament. I know.
You do have some black marks against you.
I do. So on the swearing, I mean, I've apologised in Parliament to my mum. I lost my temper, and I think people have been very understanding about that on the doorsteps of this country, and they recognise that I'm a human being. On the bar thing, I was taking a colleague for a drink who deserved to be taken for a drink. I hadn't realised there was going to be a vote, and I mistakenly switched my camera on, but I shouldn't have done it. And I apologise to the presiding officer, and I hope that people will recognise I'm not a robot. I do make mistakes, but I'm happy to own them and to move on in the spirit of trying to do good in this country.
Some critics, particularly on the nationalist side and the SNP,
have I got critics from the nationalist side?
Shocking, isn't it? Would say that particularly the swearing incident was a sign of your true colours.
What do they think my true colours are? I mean, he who's without sin cast the first stone. Do they never swear? I mean, come on. What do they suggest? What's the subtext?
Maybe they think that you're an angry man who doesn't like women in places of power. That's
I would point to them the fact that I've actually took a very difficult party motion through my own conference to make sure that the most winnable list positions at this election are held by women, and I'm really hopeful and excited that we are going to see a big intake of women in this new parliament.
Last question, and I will time you on this one. Give us 20 seconds of why a Scottish Sun reader should vote for Scottish Lib Democrats at this election.
People are tired and frustrated. They're right to be, and we think you deserve better than that. But it needs to be a vision for change with fairness at its heart, whether that's fixing our broken NHS, driving down the cost of living, lifting up Scottish education, and putting getting Scotland moving again. But wherever you are, you have the opportunity for the first time in a long time to back us in those 10 key constituencies, but across the country on that second peach-coloured regional ballot. You'll elect somebody who will fight for you and your community and deliver that vision for change.
More like 30 seconds, but
okay, that's it.
Right. Thanks, Alex.
Cheers. Thanks, Connor. Okay, good to speak.
Cheers.